Hello friends, and thanks for stopping by for another completed month in my Reading Journal Wrap-Up video series. I had an incredible reading month in September, so let's jump right into it by starting at my reading goals page. I'm ending September strong by checking off 2 more goals. First, I can check off read 60 books. This is a huge accomplishment on its own for me. And next, I can check off my stretch goal of reading 20 physical books. This is another goal that I'm very proud to have hit. I don't know if I'll be able to complete this before the end of the year, but just for fun, I'm going to add another stretch goal to read 30 physical books. Wish me luck! Over on the Books to Read page, I'm going to add a little box and check off When the Moon Hatched and The Song of Achilles. Once again, I'm going to skip my recommended reads page and go straight into filling out my 2025 visual bookshelf with the novels I read this month. Friends, when I say this was an incredible reading month, I really mean it. Out of the 7 books I read, 5 of them were 5-star reads. We'll get into which ones I gave the high scores to in a bit, but for now, let's find out which books I read in September. This month's titles are The Daughters' War, Little Eve, Clytemnestra, The Song of Achilles, When the Moon Hatched, The Midnight Library, and finally, The Acolyte. Many of this month's picks had dark themes that made you really sit and think about what you were reading. I also had the incredible luck to read both Clytemnestra and The Song of Achilles at the same time, and it was fascinating to get an account of 2 stories with similar plot lines and events from 2 different points of view. It made for a really immersive reading experience that allowed me to enjoy the books to their fullest. September encompassed a lot of different genres, but the one thing that made this month so special was the sheer amount of 5-star reads. At one point in the month, after reading a streak of 5-star books, I had to wonder if every book I was going to read would be a perfect score, but unfortunately, the streak didn't last. What a bummer. This visual bookshelf is starting to get so full, and I just love how it's looking. Flipping the page, I'm going to color in the last dot in the Black Tongue series. That's another finished series for the year. Let's skip past the next spread and log this month's reads in the 2025 book log. The first book of September was The Daughters' War by Christopher Buehlman. This novel is the prequel to The Black Tongue Thief. Set in a war-torn and goblin-infested country, we follow our protagonist, Galva, who has defied her family's wishes and joined the army in their new and untested units, the Raven Knights. With the majority of fighting-age men killed in previous wars, this war is now mainly made up of women warriors. Galva cares for 2 giant war corvids, huge raven-like birds magically bred to eviscerate any goblins they find. But the drawback is that these intelligent birds can also turn on their handlers in an instant. Despite the dangers of both the goblins and the corvids, sometimes the greatest dangers are those closest to you. This was an unforgettable read that had me gripped from the very first chapter. It was raw, gritty, and heart-wrenching. I gave it a perfect 5 out of 5 score. Next up was Little Eve by Catriona Ward. This was a spooky, gothic horror novel about a small family of individuals living on an isle off the wild coast of Scotland. Locals on the coast think of the family as strange, and they're right, because the family follows an unusual religion where they believe one of their ranks will become the vessel for their leader, called the Adder, and are preparing for what they believe is the end of the world and its imminent rebirth. This results in a brutal murder, a ceremony gone wrong, and terrible secrets coming to light. This twisty-turny novel will keep you on your toes, have you questioning everything, and keep you up at night. I absolutely devoured this book, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The third book of the month was Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. This novel follows our main character, Clytemnestra, as she grapples with betrayal, hatred, love, and brutal revenge for those who have wronged her. Married to the legendary Greek king Agamemnon against her wishes, this novel goes into great detail about Clytemnestra's life as a reluctant queen, her sister, Helen of Troy's story, and the battle for Troy. This was a dazzling novel that truly made me feel like I was there in the book's setting, seeing everything that Clytemnestra saw and felt. Ultimately, this was a story that let you know that to have power, you had to take it for yourself, for it would never be freely given to you. This also got a solid 5 out of 5-star rating. Up next, and almost a tandem read with Clytemnestra, was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This novel tells the story of Achilles, the best of the Greeks, from the point of view of his loyal companion and exiled prince, Patroclus, as they grow up together, are trained by the centaur Chiron, and inevitably go on to fight in the battle for Troy after Helen of Sparta is kidnapped. This was an absolutely beautifully written book that made me feel so engrossed in the story and well-being of the main characters. Much like Clytemnestra, I often felt that I was physically there in the book's setting while reading and completely immersed in the world that they inhabited. I gave The Song of Achilles a perfect 5 out of 5 score. The next book I read was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, and this is unfortunately where my streak of 5-star reads ended. Over the course of this year, there have been several books that I really looked forward to reading that have massively let me down, and When the Moon Hatched was one of those. Although the first few chapters were interesting and promised a magical world filled with dragons and intrigue, there was a huge shift towards it being heavily romance-based shortly after those first early chapters, where all the fantasy and plot lines were just kind of thrown out the window. There were a bunch of spicy scenes very early on, and I found that the way that they were written was cringy at best. The writing in this book felt very juvenile, but also pretentious at the same time. It was so strange. There were long-winded descriptions of everything and metaphors galore that made absolutely no sense when you took a moment to actually think about them. And the over-the-top use of the F word in nearly every piece of dialogue between the main characters, whether they were just talking to each other or to other characters, really pulled me out of the story and element. The setting for this novel is medieval fantasy, yet the author constantly peppered in modern slang or modern elements that wouldn't exist during that time frame. It all just felt very disorganized. The dragons didn't even play a minor role in the story, let alone a major one. To say this was a gigantic disappointment would be putting it nicely. I rated this a generous 2 out of 5 stars. My next read for September was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book really blew me away in its beauty and simplicity, and the way it described and dealt with depression, death, grief, and how you see yourself through the eyes of others. Our protagonist, Nora Seed, finds herself in the Midnight Library, a liminal space between life and death, where she gets the chance of living other lives based on choices she regrets not making. Forced to search within herself, she has to decide what is truly fulfilling in life and what makes it worth living in the first place. This was another stunning and unforgettable read that often had me choked up and feeling all the big emotions. I gave this a 5 out of 5 star rating. Lastly, I read The Acolyte by Nick Cutter. This novel was a stark and gripping story about a man named Jonah Murtaugh, who is an acolyte in the New Bethlehem police force. Only, this police force isn't quite what it seems. He and his partners are indoctrinated and trained to eradicate all heretical religious faiths, their practitioners, and artifacts after the country has been overthrown and the power given to religious zealots. When a string of bombings paralyzes the city where Jonah lives and works, anti-religious fanatics are initially suspected, but startling clues point to a far more sinister perpetrator. The worst part, though, is that Jonah himself is starting to realize that he's not a believer anymore, which could have disastrous consequences if he's caught. This was a really interesting read, And if you're a fan of The Handmaid's Tale, I definitely recommend this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5 rating. Fun fact, I got to go to a horror-based book convention in September called DreadCon, and I got to meet Nick Cutter in person. He was so incredibly kind, and I even got a couple of my favorite books of his that I owned signed. How cool! Let's now flip over to my visual tracker and add all the covers of the books I read this month. I know I've said before that my visual bookshelf is one of my favorite things about my journal, but I think my absolute favorite part is this visual tracker. It's such a hit of dopamine to see these pages getting filled out, and having all the covers displayed like this, oh, it makes me so happy at how it's all coming together. Let's flip the page again and pick the book of the month for September. I'll be honest, it was incredibly difficult to pick a favorite for this month since I had so many 5-star reads. Putting them all together, I managed to whittle it down to my top 3 by getting rid of Little Eve and Clytemnestra. From there, I made the super tough decision to eliminate The Song of Achilles, as I felt both The Daughters' War and The Midnight Library were the two that really stood out to me the most. Finally, I ended up picking The Daughters' War as my favorite for the month because of how much I kept thinking about it and wanting to return back to it. You know you've struck gold when you keep thinking about a certain character or setting and wondering how things would have played out differently weeks after you've already read about them. Next, let's update the yearly stats spread and add in all of September's information. In books read per month, I'll fill it in with 7 books read. For reading types, I read 2 physical books and 5 audiobooks. Here you can see that I had to add in a little flap to my books by the page graph as I ran out of room. I wasn't expecting that to happen. In books by the page, I read 2 books in the 1 to 200 plus pages column, 1 in the 300s, 3 in the 400s, and lastly, 1 in the 500s. For genres read this month, I'll add 1 in fantasy, 2 in horror, 2 in historical fiction, 1 in romantasy, and lastly, 1 in fiction. And finally, for when was it written, I'll add 1 in the 2010s column, 2 in the 2015 column, and finally 4 in the 2020s column. It looks like I might have to make another flap next month to accommodate for this graph running out of space too. Whew. Moving on, let's flip over to our monthly overview for September and add in all the details and info for the month. I'll add 7 in total books read and a respectable 2,698 in total pages read. Next is the best and worst reads of the month. We already know that the coveted best of the month spot went to The Daughters' War. And if you've made it this far into the video, I'm sure you can guess which book got the worst spot. If you said When the Moon Hatched, you're 100% correct. Just like always, I'll add in all the books to the monthly book log with the date I finished the book, its page count, and its rating. Finally, I'll end this spread by filling in my mini calendar up in the corner with the date that I finished each book and the color that corresponds to its genre. And just like that, my reading journal recap for September is complete. We had a crazy busy month, juggling work and chores and fun outings, which meant we didn't get to watch any movies or TV shows. But it was still a really fantastic month with so many amazing reads. The highlight was definitely getting to meet Nick Cutter in person and seeing all the other incredible vendors and books at DreadCon 2025. Have you gotten to meet any of your favorite authors? Or have you gotten any of your books signed? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and for watching my videos. If you want to continue to see more content from me, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel, or just leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and happy reading. See you in the next video. Bye.